Assalamu alaikum and good greetings. So today we'll be watching a video titled Andrew Tate's Reasons for Converting a ... Yikes! Exclamation mark. This is by What Do You Meme? Without further ado, let's watch.
In this short clip, Andrew Tate gives 5 reasons for why he now rejects Christianity and decided to become a Muslim. Now, people are free to believe whatever they want. The only problem is, I don't think that Andrew knows that all 5 of the reasons that he gives poses a serious problem for him and his newfound beliefs.
I'll ask you now, because this is the hot topic, especially in the Muslim community, about your conversion. Yeah. So tell us the story, like what happened exactly.
Well, I think a lot of people who've been following me for a while understand that I've been very respectful of Islam for a long time.
Yeah, sure.
I was born in a Christian country, I was raised as a Christian, and I've always been very respectful of Islam, and it's become more and more obvious to me and more pertinent that Islam is the last religion on the planet. It's just, for me, it feels like the last religion on earth. I feel like there's no other religion. People say to me, why did you convert? And I said, I don't really feel it as a conversion. It's almost like I knew God was real and now I've become religious. And they say, well, you were religious before. I was like, religious before how? Christian? What does Christian mean? Like, who's not a Christian? You go to Christian nations and everyone says they're a Christian. Look how they live their lives. Go to the average church. Is anyone actually fearful of God? Anybody? No. The girls are out on Saturday night drinking and then they turn up to church because their parents made them.
Okay, so the first reason that he's given for why he converted to Islam was based on the behavior of Christians compared to the behavior of Muslims. His point here is that in order for there to be a religion, there needs to be some rules and boundaries that make up of the religion. Now, of course, Christianity does have rules and boundaries for its beliefs and how Christians are supposed to live. But what Andrew is focusing on here is how he believes that Christians act. And so according to him, since he believes that Christians don't follow the rules and they don't have boundaries, then that means that Christianity can't be true. And of course, he believes that Muslims do, and therefore Islam must be true. Now, I don't entirely agree with...
Now first, I think his point is about the teaching itself, that it takes itself seriously, something like that. Of course, yeah, that's the element of the vast majority of the follower of a religion, right? And yeah, it ties together there. But I think from Andrew Tate's perspective, the way what he mentioned, of course, he gave an example of the followers of that religion, but from his perspective, it is inherent in that religion that you can do that. You can do something like this or not, and then suddenly, you know, tell me if I'm wrong on 2 things: whether you think that's how he think, and number 2, whether that religion is inherently as such, right? For example, is there any dress code for Christianity that people have to abide with, and if you do not follow, then meaning that you are not really following the teaching, or as long as you believe, feel free to do whatever you want. Meaning, I think that's the sense that he had
with his assessment of Christians or Muslims, but let's go ahead and go with that for a moment and assume that he's right about this. When it comes to the question of what religion is true, like all truth isn't based on whether or not people follow a certain set of rules, and it's not even based on whether or not people believe that it's true or not. Something that's true is true whether or not people follow it, and no matter what people believe. So in other words,
I agree with that.
even if no Christians follow the Christian teachings, that doesn't mean that Christianity is false, and even if every Muslim followed the Quran perfectly, it wouldn't be any indicator if Islam were true or not. In fact,
yes, that in itself doesn't prove anything.
Based on Andrew's criticism of the mainstream media and what he considers to be the leftist agenda, I think that he would also agree that something doesn't become true simply because a lot of people believe and follow it. If he did, then he would believe that the leftist ideology is true. So it's strange to me that the first reason he gave for why he converted to Islam is actually based on the large number of people who believe and follow it. Now, I do want to talk about what he said when it comes to how Christians live.
I'm not sure that statement is correct.
Would believe that the leftist ideology is true. So it's strange to me that the first reason he gave for why he converted to Islam is actually based on the large number of people who believe and follow it. Now,
follow it perhaps, but believe, I don't think so, because I think what he meant or what he think is that the people that follow, the people that actually believe in that religion, you know, that's the premise, right? So I don't think the criticism about how many people believe in it accurately address the reasoning. But in terms of those who follow it, perhaps. But I think from my understanding, the nature of the religion that do not have any specified rules, for example, to be followed, perhaps is part of the equation that he taught.
I do want to talk about what he said when it comes to how Christians live, because there's a lot to say about it. So we'll come back to that point here in a little bit. Let's go ahead and move on to his next reason.
And also, Islam very closely reflects my personal beliefs. Through my personal life, I've learned that if you don't have standards and you're not a strong person who's prepared to defend his ideas, you will be crushed.
Yes.
And we look at most religions in the world today which are not prepared to defend their ideas. What's happened to them? They're just getting crushed.
Okay, the second reason that he gives for converting to Islam is that Islam is a religion that's capable of defending its ideas. Now, when he talks about defending ideas, he can mean that either intellectually or with force and violence. If he means intellectually, then, of course, the entire apologetics empire, going all the way back to Paul the Apostle, is enough to refute that claim. Christians have been defending their faith at the highest intellectual levels since the inception of the church, all the way through the scientific revolution to C.S. Lewis, and all the way to the thought giants of today, like William Lane Craig and Alvin Plantinga and Francis Collins of the Human Genome Project, and so on. So if Andrew does mean intellectually, then he seems to not be aware of history in general when it comes to this topic. But I think that he is aware of that. And based on what he said on other podcasts, I think that what he likely means by defending is defending ideas with force and violence.
If I had to bet on a religion, I'd have to bet on Islam. You can't f with Islam. You can't insult their prophets. You can't insult their gods. You insult their shit, they go rioting. They'll kill you. They'll chop your head off. You can insult Jesus all day. No one cares.
So it seems to me that what he's saying is that religions are getting crushed from not being able to defend their ideas with force and violence. But if defending ideas with violence is what he now considers to be a virtue.
Yeah. Okay, now, because I'm not defending Andrew Tate for whatever reason, right? So what he thinks is what he thinks. And I don't know him. Haven't heard enough from him to know what exactly he thinks. What he said that, because there are several things. One is they go riot. Now, is that from Islam? No, right? Meaning that rioting is not from Islam. If you are talking about acting with the system, meaning the system have certain established rules, etc., then you can say that as long as you can, link what you are talking about with the teaching, then it can be from Islam. But rioting, etc., if Andrew Tate's admiration to Islam is from seeing people rioting when some people talk bad about Prophet Muhammad SAW, that act of rioting is not really established from Islam. It's more emotional actions. So yeah, that's a criticism that I would also say. But he said to the end, when he contrasts with people can say anything about Jesus, no one care, that doesn't actually, it's not really about violence. It's about whatever, right? I get a sense of that as well. So yeah, and personally I have that question as well. How, meaning in terms of feeling, do Christians feel anything when they see Jesus being mocked, etc.? If they don't feel anything, it's just whatever. I have a serious question about that. But if they feel something, but they say that no, yeah, I cannot stand that, that shouldn't happen, I really whatever. And but Christianity teach that how to deal with this is by this means. Hence, we do not go about it with violence. Then I would like to hear about that actually, right? Whether it's the issue of people don't care, you can say whatever you want, it doesn't affect me, because my affiliation, my association is not that deep rooted, etc. I don't know. Or it is, even though it affects me emotionally, but my religion teach me how to deal with it in the correct way. In Islam, there's that aspect actually, right? Meaning that you wouldn't sit well if you see something happen that shouldn't happen. But also Islam teach a proper way to respond, to act upon anything. Rioting, etc., go into violence is not part of what Islam teach actually.
Then this would seem to run counter to his views on free speech, which he considers to be of utmost importance, especially since he's been deplatformed in most social media networks. But more on that in a second. Let's hear his next reason.
God to me is strong, God to me is something to be feared.
Yeah.
God to me is someone that people are afraid to mock.
Yeah.
God to me is someone that you have to go out of your way to prove something to. God to me has red lines.
Yeah.
Like God to me represents the Islamic faith. The Christian God to me, I don't see God.
Okay, so his third reason for converting to Islam is that people are afraid of Allah and they're afraid to mock Allah. But there's one big problem with that. Personally, I'm not afraid to mock Islam because I don't believe that Allah exists. And when it comes to everyone who wants to mock Allah or Islam, but they don't, the question is, what exactly are they afraid of? Are they afraid of Allah, as Tate seems to imply? Of course not. As we all know, the only reason that people are afraid to mock Allah is because they're afraid that Muslims will kill them for it. But that's not really evidence for anything, really. And of course, Andrew doesn't accept this type of logic when it comes to leftist ideologies that he's against. I mean, how seriously do you think Andrew would take me if I told him that, for me, an ideology is one that people are afraid to mock, and then I implied that a leftist ideology must be true since people are afraid to mock it? If I did, then he would rightly tell me how goofy of a statement that would be, since it's not the ideology that people are afraid to mock, but instead it's the people that will cancel you in the name of the ideology that people are afraid of.
Islam very closely reflects my personal beliefs.
So one of the other reasons that Andrew gave for embracing Islam was the fact that it was supposed to line up closely with his beliefs. Now, of course, being a victim of cancel culture himself, Andrew doesn't see it as a virtue for society to cancel someone because they're offended by someone else expressing their freedom of speech. However, he seems to be unaware that the person that's interviewing him, Muhammad Hijab, is in full support of people being canceled on social media, all because he was offended by David Wood's freedom of speech.
The Islamophobe David Wood and his accomplice. What we need to do is both of those individuals are working primarily only to try and target Islam and the Muslim community from time to time as well. These guys are Islamophobes, and obviously they desecrated the Quran last week. The call to action here is very straightforward. We're going to go to Patreon, okay? We're going to go to Patreon, we're going to make an account, and then when we make an account, we're going to mass report, both of their channels. Report for something that happened outside of Patreon. You're going to mention how offended you feel as a Muslim community, whatever.
But also, Tate seems to be unaware that Hijab's partner, Ali Dawa, said that in ideal countries, he's in full support of canceling not just their voice, but the lives of those that freely decide to leave Islam and use their free speech to tell others about it.
You know what Adam did? You came to Adam with a shock effect. Do you know your religion and Ali Dawa and Muhammad Hijab and Imran, they believe that you should have capital punishment to apostates? And you just want Adam to be like, no, really? Well, Adam is taking the mick out of you. This isn't part of our religion. There's a reason to it. Yeah? There's a reason why there's a capital punishment. Because people like you, little weaklings who leave their religion and cause corruption in the land by spreading it, the capital punishment in Islamic law would be applied to you. We have no doubt. And we're proud of that.
So if Andrew truly is against people being canceled because they're using their free speech, then that's a problem, since his friends seem to think that Islam is for the biggest anti-free speech and ultimate cancellation campaign of all time.
And we're proud of that.
Now, what makes this so ironic is because
Now, on this topic, okay, this is not the meaning, because the topic here, because if I go into that direction, it will be longer video than it intended to be. So I'll leave that in a different video. But my question to you is, because he's commenting on this to point towards Andrew Tate, that Andrew Tate is against cancel culture or prohibiting free speech or something like that, right? So in terms of Christianity, is there any boundary of quote-unquote free speech? I'm just wondering about this, because in Islam, of course, there's a boundary for everything, meaning you cannot transgress certain things, meaning there's no unlimited rights. You can say it as such, right? Meaning that you cannot say that it's my right to do things and when it is actually stepping onto other people's rights to certain other things, right? So there's boundary over anything, including there's a limitation of what you can say. Of course, to go into detail, that will be a different video. But is there such a thing in Christianity, or is free for all? Everything is not against the teaching of Christianity. Meaning, as a Christian, if you talk and spread hateful speech, for example, right? You say something that is really out of hate towards certain groups, certain ethnicity, certain whatever. Is that fundamentally something against Christianity, or no? Christianity allows anything can be how to say, can be said. Okay, I'm too hungry to speak right now.
because just a few days ago, Andrew Tate said that he believes that those who silence the freedom of speech are always the bad guys.
Every single bad thing that's ever happened has come from censorship. It's the beginning. The good guys never censor. It's the bad guys who censor, always from the beginning. So if you have a duty to yourself and to God, you have to stand up and say something. This is reality.
So that begs a question of, is he teamed up with the good guys or the bad guys? But the next reason that he gives is an even bigger problem that goes completely against Islam.
And the reason I am now so absolutely certain that God is real is because I've seen evil. I've seen shaitan. I've seen it. When you see enough evil, you realize that there must be an equal and opposite force. And there are people out there in the world today doing the work of the devil, genuine demons, who are trying to destroy the baseline morality that's inside of all of us. We're all born with some kind of morality, and they're trying to destroy it.
And we're proud of that.
The last reason that Andrew gave for converting to Islam is because people are trying to destroy baseline morality. And I agree with him on that one. The only problem is it goes against his views on Islam on his own standards. According to Andrew, leftists want to undermine baseline morality and convince you of something that isn't true instead.
And the baseline morality, I don't think most people understand that when they're doing this under the guise of tolerance, when they're saying be so tolerant that you no longer believe in right from wrong, they're not doing that to make society a better place. They're doing that to empty your brain so that you have no resistance to the slave mind programming. They want to get you to a point where if they tell you the sky is green, you look at with your own eyes and you see blue, but no, the sky is green. That's what they want, so that you have to have nothing in your brain that can prevent that. If you're a person who sticks up for what he believes, all that's bad to them. They want all of that gone so they can tell you the sky is green.
But I personally can't think of anything that's more fundamental to morality than not deleting people who speak publicly about the fact that they don't agree with you any longer. If having the right not to be deleted because of something that you say isn't baseline morality, then I don't know what is. But unfortunately, most Muslim scholars, most Muslim countries, most Muslim traditions are all in support of deleting people who leave their faith and talk about it publicly.
And we're proud of that.
So when he says things like this,
So his comment is about Muslim, right? Not about the teaching itself.
That's what they're most afraid of. They're most afraid of young men waking up and going, no, I don't believe that. You have to believe it. No, I don't believe it. I don't want to. Or I want to believe X. Or I want to be a moral person. They genuinely have a problem with baseline morality.
Yes.
Those are the things they're most afraid of. If you teach people to have standards for themselves and to be morally strong people and to know right from wrong, then they can't brainwash you. They're doing that to empty your brain so that you have no resistance to the slave mind program.
it makes it clear that he doesn't understand Islam as well as he thinks, since it goes against everything that he says that he's against. This is a really big problem for Andrew because now he has to make a choice. On the one hand, the reason why Andrew believes that Islam is true is because its followers take its teaching seriously. And here we have an example of them doing just that. But if Andrew accepts that teaching, then it goes against his own personal views, and by his own standards, it would make him a brainwashed slave. But on the other hand, if he does decide to think for himself and not agree with Islam's extreme cancellation of people who exercise free speech, then he would be no better than the Christians that he condemned for not following their religious teachings.
The Bible says no and you're just ignoring it. What is this? It's not even a thing.
So I don't see a third option. Either Andrew becomes a brainless slave and he allows people to erase what's fundamentally a baseline morality for all human beings, or he would have to become a hypocrite and be just as bad as those Christians that he considers cowards. Either way, Andrew has a problem. But this is ultimately the problem with his Islamic views, isn't it? I mean, really think about it. Since his views are in conflict, no matter what he chooses, he's either going to fail his own standards or he's going to fail God's standards. The big problem with Andrew's conception of God is that he doesn't see God as perfect. If Andrew thinks that he can save himself,
How is that related? Seeing God as perfect with whatever that have been said until this point?
by appeasing God, then Andrew isn't envisioning a perfect God, since a perfect God can't just blink at sin or just arbitrarily forgive sin, and he can't just accept someone into heaven.
What?
God as perfect. If Andrew thinks that he can save himself by appeasing God, then Andrew isn't envisioning a perfect God, since a perfect God can't just blink at sin or just arbitrarily forgive sin, and he can't just...
A perfect God cannot forgive sin. Why? How is that statement based on any foundation that a perfect God cannot just simply forgive sin, meaning that even if God want to forgive sin, no, God cannot, because that would be imperfect God. Can someone explain that? Meaning, is that because if that premise is based on specific Christian teaching, then it's obviously within Christianity itself. So if you don't believe in that statement you don't believe as well. But if that statement is to be taken as a fundamental statement that is agreed upon by everyone, how is that statement established that a perfect God cannot forgive sin? That's weird.
Just accept someone into heaven who fails occasionally. But instead, a perfect God requires moral perfection in order to live in his presence. And even,
those criteria only make sense if you already believe in Christianity, right? And what it teach. If you just come through, meaning that any people, Buddhism, atheist, Muslim, etc. Meaning that, okay, let's forget what is the teaching of each our religion. Let's establish a foundation that everyone can agree upon based on something, right? Meaning it's rational, it's logic, it's agreed upon. To say that, you cannot put all these statements there, right? Meaning that a perfect God, blah blah blah, whatever he said just now, right? I think the only people that can accept that is Christians, because it's embedded in their teachings, in their theology.
More importantly, a perfect God can't be manipulated by our religious and moral performance. It's because of this that I believe that it's Andrew who's not taking God's moral demand seriously enough. Not necessarily Christians, when it comes to salvation, that is. On Christianity, God is perfect, and therefore he's perfect in justice. Now, a judge who's perfect...
So when he say in Christianity, then of course it is within the scope of Christianity. So I can accept that, meaning that, okay, you are talking from the perspective of Christianity. I don't agree with that statement, fine. But earlier he said it as if it is a universal statement, which is bizarre.
Perfect injustice will punish every single wrongdoing. If a judge were to let a single wrongdoing go unpunished, then he wouldn't be perfect in justice. Since
that analogy is so weird, putting a judge and God, because judge is assigned to that role to play a certain function, and he is bound by that role and task, right? Of course, he cannot go, he didn't set the rule, he implement, right? There's a big difference to take that analogy to God. And many Christians do that. I'm not sure whether they realize it or not. Because if you know, because a judge is confined by the system that he function. So of course, he cannot simply just, I forgive you. Of course, that's understood. But to relate that to God, that's how can you relate such thing that is not even comparable? I'm not saying human and God in terms of comparable. I'm saying that the role, the function, right? God is the one that created the rules, etc., right? So suddenly you want to impose a certain rule to God. No, you cannot forgive sin. No, you cannot. You have to, every sin have to be punished. You cannot simply forgive. Meaning, who imposed that role to God?
God actually is perfect, and he's perfect in justice. This means that even the best Muslim in the entire universe is still infinitely separated from a perfect and a holy God, since they've committed sins and haven't lived perfectly moral lives. But thankfully, perfect justice isn't God's only attribute. On Christianity, God is also perfect in mercy. Although perfect justice and mercy...
That is interesting, ironic statement. God is perfect in mercy, but still, with God's mercy, perfect mercy, God cannot simply forgive, unfortunately, because you are bound by our rules that you put onto you. I'm not sure whether that's my view of what Christians do to God. Just my view, my perspective. Feel free to comment and discuss on that.
Would be a contradiction given the Islamic view of God. On Christianity, his perfect justice and mercy met at the cross of Christ. In God's rich and perfect mercy, Jesus willingly took on the punishment of our sins himself.
That's another thing that is, because Christians always say about historical evidence, right? Is there any historical evidence that Jesus willingly...
In God's rich and perfect mercy, Jesus willingly took on the punishment of our sins himself.
Is there any historical, because do not take, what is imposed by the connotation that comes after, right? Historically, even it's because Christians proud of themselves saying that historically Jesus exists, Jesus died on the cross. Is there any Christian that believe that is historically factual? Can you also point out that historically factual as well, Jesus willingly died on the cross? Is there any factual thing that highlight to that?
And offered us the life that he lived in our place, so that way we can live in his presence as new creatures. It's in this way that Christianity can say that God is perfect and allow us into heaven while preserving his perfect justice and mercy. Of course, this doesn't mean that Christians shouldn't be living holy lives, and if we truly understand what this means for us, then we likely will out of gratitude and thankfulness. But what it does mean is...
I think that's the only reason why Christians want to live a good life, right? Out of gratitude. Because it doesn't really have any implication, right? It's just that if you are grateful, do live a good life.
that we have to be realistic about how we get into heaven. To believe in a different God that lets us into heaven because of how good we are severely underestimates just...
No, wait. What he just said there is nothing related to whatever Andrew Tate said or, of course, Islamic perspective. It's just his idea of what Islam says or teach. But it doesn't have anything to do with the earlier part of the video anyway. Because if you want to phrase what Islam actually teach, it's not that.
How selfish and evil the human heart truly is, and how even our best deeds are tainted by sin and selfish motives. To think that we could offer our good deeds to a perfect God for entrance into heaven is to completely overestimate our own goodness while also severely underestimating God's perfection and holiness. The solution...
I'm not sure what his statement is.
To think that we could offer our good deeds to a perfect God for entrance into heaven is to...
I'm not sure whether he implies that is what Islam teach, because Islam definitely did not teach that. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith even say something against that, right? Meaning that no one can enter paradise with their own deeds. And the Sahaba say, even you, even me, right? Meaning all of our good deeds, of course, when it is about the companion, the Sahaba, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even more, their deeds is meaning incomparable with us, right? But even that is in no way can, how to say, and no way any human can say that this is my good deeds, I deserve to go in heaven. Prophet Muhammad SAW actually teach that no one deserve, no one can buy entrance in paradise. We enter only with the rahmat of Allah. But Allah has put in place, or Allah have promised certain things, Allah has guaranteed certain things, in the sense that if you fulfill this, even though your deeds doesn't deserve my heaven, but out of mercy, etc., I have promised this, and you strive your best, etc., right? So all of those, we have to cover a lot of Quranic verse to get a full comprehensive picture about that. But what he said, if he implied that this is actually Islamic teaching, he's terribly mistaken about what Islam actually teach. But I'm not that shocked if he, his idea about Islam is way off, but just pointing out to you.
Completely overestimate our own goodness while also severely underestimating God's perfection and holiness. The solution to this problem is not trusting in ourselves. I personally am not trusting in a sinner and a faulty man to please a perfect God. It can only be found in a perfect God who is willing to come into our world and live a perfect life in our place. That's why salvation of Christianity is given by grace and accepted by faith. It's because it has a realistic view about how sinful we really are and how holy God really is. So,
is that statement can be justified? Is that only realistic way to show that?
Not only are all of Andrew's reasons for embracing Islam in conflict with most of the things that he values the most, and not only do his views show exactly why he and the rest of us need a savior, they're also based on the same assumption that all of the other religions are based on. Islam, like every other faith system in the world, says, I have to obey so that way I might be good enough to be accepted by God. But
anyway,
Christianity says, I'm accepted by God, and therefore I get to obey. I don't think that all of this is...
So the first premise, I accept that God, is based on what? Meaning that when they put their faith in God, in Jesus, they already know for sure that God accepts them. Is that what it means? Because I have seen some Christian that really, I'm not sure whether to say it cocky or something, but because they are full of confidence, God have accepted them, and they are guaranteed of paradise or heaven or walking with God. They are fully sure about that, right? Without a doubt. Hence, it shows from their behavior. Of course, from Islamic perspective, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam even, right, meaning that his actions show that always striving to be as compliance, or as you understand that, meaning we do all the good deeds to please Allah, etc. Meaning we are never, quote unquote, be in a position that we are so sure of ourselves compared to that, right? So if, just a question to a Christian, if you see a Christian that is so sure of themselves that they are already accepted by God, is that what he said about put put too much faith on ourselves compared to God. Is that similar in that sense, or somehow it's different because somehow they become like that because they already convinced of the promise from God that once you do this, God is accepting to you. And because some Christians also become so confident because they say they have talked to God, right? So I'm not sure how, I'm not sure that. Anyway.
Andrew's fault. So go ahead and click here to see why my friend David Wood believes that Andrew Tate was actually
All right, so that's it. Well, interesting video. What do you say? Feel free to comment, especially if you're a Christian and there's certain things that I said that you think you need to elaborate or clarify or teach me certain things that I have missed out. With that, thank you for watching. See you next time.